Hi everyone, it's Nicole here today for Lawn Fawn with a couple of You Are Sublime cards featuring the You Are Sublime stamps and dies, as well as a few other new dies from the summer 2018 Lawn Fawn release. We're going to start with a Father's Day card since that will be coming up here in just a couple of weeks. And we're going to create this awesome stenciled underwater scene background with the Happy Father's Day line border up at the top of the card. And the image is colored with some Marvy Plume pastel markers. These are water-based markers for beautiful, maybe a pastel look, maybe something you wouldn't have thought of using originally, but really adds a great look to this background scene. Now I am starting with some Bristol Smooth cardstock. I did lay out my Father's Day line border, just kind of planning what I thought I was going to do there at the top of the card. And I'm going to start inking up this Bristol Smooth cardstock background that measures 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. We will be trimming off the top of this, so I didn't take the ink all the way to the top of the panel. We're inking it up with Faded Jeans, Blueprint Sketch, and Black Soot Distress Oxide inks. These are the colors that are going to create our underwater ocean scene. Faded Jeans at the top, Blueprint Sketch kind of in the middle, and Black Soot down near the bottom. Now we want to work to get a nice blend of these three colors before we add anything else. I'm going to take some Ocean Scene Builder stencils from Honeybee Stamps now, layer this over my inked background, and I'm going to kind of pounce on some YETI white pigment ink. This is Lawn Fawn's white pigment ink. It's my favorite pigment ink that I have in my collection. And I'm pouncing it on rather than rubbing it on because it could shift the stencil. It's really sticky, and so it doesn't really rub on very good, but if you pounce it on, it works much, much better. I'm going to remove my stencil, and you can see that those rays coming down to the bottom of the ocean are really dark. What I like to do is take a dry paper towel and just rub off that excess ink, and that mutes them really nicely and gives it a fantastic look. Now I decided I did not want those rays going all the way down to the very bottom of my scene, so I'm applying some Black Soot and Blueprint Sketch ink down near the bottom and then kind of rubbing off that excess ink to blend it nicely and spritzing my background with water from a distress sprayer, blotting that dry, and that really kind of finishes off that underwater ocean scene. I'm going to trim off 1 inch from the top of this panel now. That is where the Happy Father's Day line border is going to go. I also have a background panel from some smooth white cardstock, and that's the distressed panel. The underwater ocean panel is going to go along the bottom edge of this, and my Happy Father's Day line border is going to go up at the top. Now I need to gauge where that's going to go, and then I need to pick out the sentiments that I want to use for the rest of my greeting from the You Are Sublime stamp set. I want my greeting to read Happy Father's Day, hope you have a sublime day. So I'm positioning those kind of where I want them to go underneath that. Figure out exactly kind of the placement, figure out how I want that to look. You do want to make sure that your background is completely dry before you stamp anything there. Now I also want to plan out what images from You Are Sublime that I want to use. This is something I kind of do before committing to stamping, to die cutting, adhering, any of these things to a card. This gives me a really good idea of how many images I have available, what I want to use and where, and that way I know if I need multiples of something. Like I know that some of the fish images and things that I will want additional ones. I want more of that little fish especially. If I need more seaweed, whatever it might be. It just gives you a good idea of the space you have to fill. Once I kind of have that all planned out, I'm going to die cut my Happy Father's Day border from some Lawn Fawn Blue Jay cardstock. Be sure to keep the apostrophe for the word fathers. In fact, it's still stuck in my die, so I just kind of left it there for the time being so I don't lose it. And there's what that's going to look like. Off camera, I did stamp my images. I stamped them with versafine onyx black ink because I'm using a water-based marker, so it's going to work pretty well. These are the Marvy Colorin Plume 2 pastel markers. This is a set of 12. I have listed the colors I'm using at the top of the screen. I'm also using a water blender pen to blend out some of these colors for a little bit more of a watercolored look, or if I need to soften anything. And just kind of coloring here as I go, adding some detail. One thing I did to a lot of the fish and the eel is to add some little dot detail. I do this with my Copic markers a lot, and so I thought I would try it with these water-based markers as well, and I really got fantastic results with these. Just really works great. And I even just used the brush tip in to do that since it was already open, and it really ended up creating a great texture for these little critters. They will blend a little bit when laying down the dark color and then blending with the light. They're not really made to do that necessarily, but it does work. They'll blend even better with a little touch of water. I love using a water brush pen for that. If you are going to add dotted detail, make sure that if you have used any water or applied any water there on top to blend anything out, that you let it dry before trying to add those. Otherwise, you're going to lose that dot detail. So the eel was peppermint and yellow-green. The rock was light brown and cream yellow. The little pink fish for my card are all colored with bubblegum pink, pardon me, and blush pink. My submarine is going to be aquamarine and pale blue, as well as light cool gray, and I will be using my water brush pen here to really blend this out. For such a large area, this works really well. I just kind of lay down the color around the edges and then blend to get my nice seamless blend here on my submarine. Before I color anything attached to the submarine, like the windows or any of the other little extra parts there, you're going to want to let that blue dry so that when you lay down the color next to it, it doesn't bleed into that. Now this little seaweed, I originally thought I would do yellow-green and then try to pull in some of the coral pink. I did not like how this turned out, so I'm kind of ignored that one. I did not use that. I will show you here in a second how I ended up coloring the seaweed pieces that I ended up using on my card. Also, there are multiples of seaweed, of coral, of the rocks, and of the small pink fish. I started out with these images that you see here, and from there I kind of built upon that, I guess, if you will, with some additional images to fill in nicely. The coral, I love this combination, is coral pink and pastel peach. One of my favorites from this pastel marker set. This card is part of the Marvy Collaboration Week at Lawn Fawn, where the designers are using Marvy products in collaboration with Lawn Fawn stamps and dies. A fun way to kind of stretch your creative wings, if you will. Maybe you haven't used water-based markers like this. It's a great way to just try something fun, new, and different, or see how the designers have used these products and maybe inspire you if you have some of these kind of things at home that you haven't really used a lot of. I think it's always great to try new products and new markers and things like this. We'll color in my last big fish up here, and then we're going to start die cutting all of these images. I used the You Are Sublime coordinating dies to die cut these. And again, the fish all have the dot detail. I think it adds a lot To the fish especially, it gives the illusion of gills. The big purpley fish with the pink little underbelly, he's going to have some purple dots, but I needed to let him dry all the way because I did blend him out with the water brush pen. Once he is dry, I will add all those little dots to him as well. I think that adds a lot. He's so cute. I love his little tooth sticking up there. And you could even go through your collection of Lawn Fawn if you have some other sets that have lots of fish and underwater ocean type of images in them, because there are several. You could really mix and match for your underwater ocean scene. Here are those remaining seaweed pieces colored with peppermint and yellow green. You can also see my additional fish, coral, and rock. But I think the peppermint and yellow green color combinations is a lot more effective and looks better. So here is my Happy Father's Day border. I also have my sentiments that I kind of planned out earlier, but now that I know exactly how many images I'm going to use, I am ready to stamp this greeting right here underneath my line border. I just want to make sure that it doesn't interfere with the tail of the Y on the word happy. So that's why I laid out my line border before stamping this. We're going to stamp the greeting with a clear embossing ink and then heat set with a white embossing powder. And the white really pops against the underwater blue ocean scene. I also like to do embossing whenever possible before I adhere anything to the card. Embossing powder tends to like to stick to anything sticky or wet. So adhesive on die cuts and things like that, it can kind of stick to the edges at times. So I always try to do my embossing before I actually adhere anything down on my card. And I'm going to attach my panel now to the bottom edge of my white background. And then I can glue my Happy Father's Day line border down in place. I love these line border greeting dies from Lawn Fawn. I think they are fantastic. I love the straight line. I love the font. I love the size of these. They're just a really great way to get an awesome, bold sentiment on a card design. And I just want to center that along that top edge. And then I trimmed off any excess. Now I'm going to speed up the video just a little bit and start adhering all of my scene images to this underwater ocean background. I'm using a little liquid adhesive. You could also use glue dots or whatever you like to glue everything down. To hold everything down in place, I am using an acrylic block to keep it flat while the glue dries. Lots of layering of these images. You can watch the scene come to life, which is so much fun. I just love all these little pieces. I think it's really cute. Now once we have all of these down, I'm going to use the jewel picker from Marvy to add my apostrophe in the word Father's Day. And I'm also going to use my jewel picker. It has a big end and a small end, and I'm going to use the big end here to help me lift up these clear droplets while I put a little dab of glossy accents on my card and then set the droplets back down. These are going to be the water little bubbles accents on my card here today, and the jewel picker is invaluable when you're trying to attach things like sequins, small die cuts, confetti, droplets, whatever the small item might be. Helps keep your fingers out of the adhesive, and they're just amazing. The last thing I'm going to do is add some white pin detail to my stamped and colored images, add glossy accents to the windows on the submarine, and that will finish up this Happy Father's Day You Are Sublime card. My next card that I'm going to share with you today also features You Are Sublime. It's going to have a lot of the same images, but this one's going to look more like you're looking through a porthole out into the ocean, and it's a thank you card. This was created for Lawn Fawn's Inspiration Week in June. I hadn't shared the video up till now. I wanted to share a couple of ideas with the You Are Sublime stamp set. I think it's been a really popular one from the release. I've got a piece of smooth white cardstock that's 5.5 by 4.25 inches, and I'm using my Score Pal to score it every half inch. I'm scoring it every half inch. This is going to be my background that the porthole is going to be looking through, almost like you're on the inside of a ship or a boat and you're looking out into the ocean. That's kind of what the look I was going for here. So then I'm going to take one of the new porthole dies. There are 3 different sizes in the porthole frames, and we're going to use the largest one today. There's also a cute little fish, so you could definitely create maybe a die cut scene with that. And I am going to go ahead and back some fun foam, and this piece did end up being too small. I don't know why I didn't notice that until I got it done, but I had to grab a different piece of fun foam and stick it adhesive. I'm just going to save this one for later, and I placed my stick it adhesive on both sides, and then I'm going to run that through my die cutting machine to really get the stick it adhesive nice and attached to this. And then I'm going to remove the backing paper from one side and replace it with some Lawn Fawn Storm Cloud cardstock. This is going to create the porthole. So we want to have it a little bit raised. I think it's going to give it more dimension that way if it's a little bit raised. And then we're going to have this inside panel piece which appears that you're looking out into the water. So here's my bigger piece of fun foam. This is going to work much better. I like to keep all of those little pieces. So the gray cardstock that I saved, I eventually even used it, I think, to die cut a word for a card or something. I keep all those little pieces because they work great for die cutting greetings, which is what I use them for probably 90% of the time. Once we have this porthole frame die cut, the fun foam gives it a little bit more of a sturdy feel as well. We're going to need to use something to pop out all those little circles in the porthole frame. They die cut all the way, but they're so teeny tiny they don't really pop out. I'm using the Spellbinders Tool-in-One to just pop all of those and get rid of them because I want to see the white of the background of the card through this frame, if that makes sense. Then we're going to grab our background, grab our frame, and we can go ahead and pop this in place. Let's remove the backing paper and then position it as even as you can from the top and the 2 sides. And there is our porthole. Now I am going to use the porthole frame die again to die cut some Bristol Smooth cardstock that I did spray with resist spray, meaning it's going to resist the inking. And then I'm doing a direct to paper technique. Once that is completely dry, I'm doing a direct to paper technique with my Distress Oxide inks. And you can see when you rub away the ink from where that distress spray is, it leaves that awesome distress look. So instead of spritzing it with water later or splattering it with white paint, distress spray is just another option. It's really fun to play with. It is super sticky. So you might want to do it like in a box or something like that that you don't care that gets super sticky. So this is the distress spray. I even added a little bit more on top of this. I'm going to heat set that to speed up the drying process. So I did my initial spray and then I added a little more on top so that it retains the blue color, and I'm going to go over this with black soot Distress Oxide ink to darken up some of the edges of my underwater ocean. Even a little bit more of the peacock feathers as well. And then just be sure to wipe away that excess ink. And that's going to give you a fantastic background. I'm just working in all of these ink colors. Now the background can go right into our little porthole there on our card base. So here's what that's going to look like when we get that popped into place. I've also die cut a banner using a fancy folded banner, or I'm going to, and I'm going to stamp one of the greetings from the You Are Sublime stamp set on this for my card. Now let's stamp the images we're going to use for the card here today. I'm stamping these on smooth white cardstock using the Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink so we can do some Copic coloring. The colors of Copic markers I'm using for this are shown across the top of the screen. If at any time you're wondering exactly which marker colors I'm using, just like the last card or the first card in this video where I used the Marvy water-based markers, I listed those colors. Now I'm listing the Copic markers. So just two completely different type of marker options. You can use whatever you like. You can use colored pencils, other water-based markers, or watercoloring. Lots of great ways to color these in. Also, like the first card I shared today, I am creating multiples of that small little fish. I love this little fish, and I think it adds a lot to have multiples of it in the design. Adding that dot detail just like I did before to the fish, also to this little kind of purpley blue fossil piece. Give it a little more texture. Even added in a little yellow-red marker color over that. Coloring in his wetsuit and scuba diving gear now with cool gray markers and some red markers. Oftentimes I will use cool gray markers when coloring in clothing or hair for people. For fur on critters, I use warm gray a lot. It just tends to be what I gravitate towards. For the mask and helmet here, I'm just coloring in the edges very lightly with cool grays. Once this is die cut and adhered, we're going to take some glossy accents and go over this with glossy accents to give it a nice glossy raised finish. Just a couple more little pieces here to color in, and then we can get these die cut and get the rest of this card put together. And this is a little two-tone fish. I decided I didn't want to go all with the yellow reds for him, and so we're going to pull in some blue greens, which I think adds a nice little fun color touch to this little guy too. Lawn Fawn makes some of the cutest fish images. I just love them. They're really simple, but I think they're so cute. I think the little one looks like goldfish crackers a little bit, which my kids always love, even now that they're big kids. But I think that those are just really cute. Now I am ready to start adhering the images to my scene. Some of them are going to be hanging off the edge here, and I'm going to show you that here in a second, what I'm going to do to trim those off. I've not adhered my background yet to the card, so I'm going to be able to pop it off and just trim off that excess. I want to tuck my coral pieces, the seaweed, the rock kind of down near the bottom. Have my little submarine off out in the distance, and then have the fish out there floating. Any of those resist spray little areas in my background, those little white splatters you see everywhere, I think work perfectly as water bubbles and really lends to the underwater ocean feel of this card design. It's just a really fun product to play with. I'm trying to get my layering correct here for these little pieces down at the bottom. And it wasn't working keeping it in the porthole frame on my card. So I went ahead and moved it down here or out of there so that I could work with it a little easier. And here I'm just taking my scissors and trimming off any of that excess. That's going to give it a really nice clean edge, and it's going to make it inlay into that porthole frame so much easier. So now I've got some fish and I've got some bubbles left. This time, instead of using a dimensional bubble accent like I did for the Father's Day card, we're going to use the actual bubble stamped images from the stamp set and the dies and add those to our porthole. One of these fish is going to be hanging off the edge as well. This just grounds everything so much better, so it doesn't feel like it's kind of floating out there in outer space, but instead it's more of a cohesive full scene and you're only seeing a small piece of it. Glue that down on the inside here once I have everything exactly where I want it to go. I'm going to rearrange that submarine just a tiny little bit. And that's looking good. So our scene is just about all finished. A couple more images to add to this, like I mentioned, bubbles and additional fish. I did die cut this fancy folded banner from Smooth White cardstock, stamped it with a greeting from the You Are Sublime stamp set using black versafine ink. And these banners are awesome because they fold. This is the medium-sized banner from the stamp set. And I'm just attaching it kind of over that porthole frame. It works perfectly. And I'm going to just secure it with a couple of glue dots adhered there kind of near the center where it overlaps that porthole. But because it has that nice folded detail, it pops up over a dimensional porthole frame perfectly. So there is my thank you greeting. This, you could also use a birthday greeting. You could switch that up and use all kinds of different greetings from the stamp set. Nice strong adhesive for the inside. Ready to secure that down where it goes. Using my glossy accents now, like I mentioned, for the helmet, so it gives the illusion that it's a glass bubble. Want to give that plenty of time to dry. Also the windows on the submarine. Now is a good time to look at the card and determine, do you need anything else? Well, I definitely wanted to use the bubbles, and I thought I needed an additional fish. Something kind of down near the bottom, down near this seaweed, the fossil, any of that kind of stuff. So I've got my bubbles. I'm using some blue markers to add a little bit of color to that. I have my fish. Again, I'll color it just like I colored my other ones with my YR markers. Those bubbles just have a tiny touch of color, not a lot. We'll die cut these with the coordinating dies and then add these to the card to finish it off. These porthole frames, especially the large one, I guess, really you can put a lot into that scene and it still doesn't feel overwhelming or too full. When I am die cutting with manual dies like this, I like to use a little post-it tape to hold the die in place so that I can run this through my machine and cut multiple images with one pass of the machine. Saves a ton of time, so I'm not having to run it through multiple times. And I already adhered my background, so I'm just going to snip that bubble down just a tiny little bit and then tuck it along the upper edge so it looks like it's coming out of that big fish's mouth. I'm using some bling glue dots to attach these remaining little pieces. We'll tuck one of the fish down here, kind of down near the bottom as I was mentioning, and then that other bubble coming up out of its mouth. Now, just like we did for the scuba diver's helmet and the windows on the submarine, I want to take a little glossy accents and finish off the bubbles with that so it has a nice glossy raised finish. And the glossy accents will dry pretty quickly. I'm using a black glaze pen to add detail to the eyes on all of the fish. Then I'm going to take a white top fold card base, use a nice strong adhesive all over the front of that, and glue my panel down in place. That's going to finish off this Thank You, You Are Sublime card featuring the You Are Sublime stamps and dies and also the Porthole frames. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for these 2 card examples featuring new Lawn Fawn stamps and dies from the summer 2018 release. I hope this has inspired you to try some underwater ocean scene cards. The supplies I used to create these cards are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Here are a couple more videos featuring Lawn Fawn that you might be interested in. Thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll catch you next time.